Thank you. I should warn you, actually, that, as Martin said, I'm a little bit jet-lagged, tired, so all of that might impede a little bit with my ability to speak, so I apologize ahead of time for that. As Martin said, the genesis of this talk actually happened as Martin and I were having a beer or two, or many, as we were talking about the state of the industry, and he asked me to come and speak here, and here I am. But as I was thinking about it, actually, I started realizing that those drinks that we're having and talking over drinks, it's the way our company has really grown. A lot of the things that have happened around our team actually has involved some kind of alcohol or the other. I'm not going to talk about some of them. I think some of the people in the audience here have shared those moments with me, but I won't embarrass anyone. But I will show you one picture. It's this. This is us 3 weeks ago when the Order 1886 went gold. Since I have the forum here, I wanted to just officially congratulate the team and everybody who was involved. It's been an amazing 4 years actually getting to where we are. Thank you. So being here meant, at least Martin thought, that I had something to say. So I asked myself, do I have something to impart on you? Really thought about that hard. But ultimately, that's not for me to decide. I'm going to let you guys be the judge of that. I definitely didn't want to be the loudest voice here, not the most antagonizing or the most controversial one. Unfortunately, in the age of information, it's easy to scream louder than other people. It's easy to be, to rattle everybody, to be on the top of the news, and to be the talking point of every conversation. And the reality is that there's less and less substance out there in what we hear and what is told, because there are so many voices and so much noise out there. And of course, I'm not also here to show you any diagrams or charts. I'm not going to bore you before lunch with all that stuff. I'm the CEO of Ready at Dawn, but first and foremost, I'm a developer, I'm an artist, and I'm a writer. So I'm here to talk to you about our story and how we got here and why we got here. I just wanted to give you a perspective from us as a studio, as a minority in the industry. A minority being a studio that is privately held, that's navigating the waters of AAA development, that is governed mainly by publisher-owned developers. And that's kind of the case worldwide, practically. And that's kind of why the name of the talk is The Last of the Independents. I'm also not a regular dev. I don't come from a traditional development background, game background. But I guess a lot of us from our generation, I think, don't come from a regular background. We used to be gamers at heart, and there was no career in it, really, until we started this. But I grew up in Switzerland, not a very game-centric nation. It'll come into play later. I'll talk about it a little later. But I was an artist. I studied car design, and I fell into games because I was guided towards it by other people. I started at Blizzard Entertainment when the team was still small, while StarCraft was being done, and I left when we finished actually the cinematic work on World of Warcraft. I started RAD with 2 friends to build a console developer in Orange County that could stand head-to-head with the best guys out there. And 11 or so years later, we're kind of getting there, I hope, at least. We released a few games in partnership with Sony. As a matter of fact, I think Shuei-san is in the audience here. He was the guy who gave us our first chance by greenlighting Daxter. We released that game in 2006. We released God of War, Chains of Olympus in 2008, Ghost of Sparta in 2010, and the Origins Collections in 2011. But all of this was a plan for us to do what we really wanted to do, which was the Order 1886. This is the culmination of a decade of work for our studio. And when Martin brought up the theme of this conference, Without Borders, I kind of looked back at our history and I could see how it applied to us, and I'm sure it applies to every studio out there, one way or the other. Without borders meant, what borders did we break, basically, along the way? The reality of it is that borders do exist, and they need to exist, because those are the goals that we have to try and reach and go beyond. Some of those borders are set for us by the industry. Some of them we set for ourselves, for better, for worse. And really, this is really our journey of building the studio and founding the boundaries along the way and breaking them. So to go back to the beginning, Blizzard. Seems like this logo keeps on coming up, actually, all the time. It it's probably because some of us, actually many of us in the industry have this DNA in us. We've started there, a lot of us have started there, and it's actually still part of who we are. It was a band of young developers with great ideology and amazing leadership that still is there today. And what Blizzard did for us was really teach us that anything could be possible. We were kids being told, do whatever you want, pretty much. And we didn't care about time, we didn't care about anything. I know that people talk about Blizzard having all the time in the world to do anything they wanted to, but the reality is that that thinking is the reason why, in so many ways, our company actually did what it did by believing that we could do anything we wanted to. But here I was at Blizzard, at the time of StarCraft, an outsider looking in the industry and very much looking at an industry that was looking internally at the US as the source of creativity and the source of their developers, actually, for who you want to hire and who you want to work for you. And it seemed at the time that the borders were very much defined by the borders of this country. I was the first foreigner hired at Blizzard. As a matter of fact, I think I had to, at the time, I had to do my own immigration work and find a lawyer and do all of that stuff. But the reality of it is that I was there at Blizzard as a first foreigner in a small group of people, and here we are many years later at RAD, 130 people at the company, and those borders don't seem to exist anymore. We hire from everywhere in the world. And that really is the borders that we broke, actually, in terms of hiring, of course. We only can hire as many people as the immigration laws in this country can allow. But our industry is definitely global because talent is flourishing outside the industry. And that's where we go now to basically look for the people that we need. But as that was happening, actually, this was a few years ago, as we were basically looking for people, we started realizing also that it brought up flaws in the way that our industry works and the ancillary side of our industry, which is the education system in our industry. We couldn't find the people we wanted to in the US, and we went to schools, we looked at people graduating, and we just couldn't find exactly what we wanted to, and it brought kind of a question to hand, which was what's happening with education in our industry. And although the US remains the nexus of game development, it seems like we've kind of lost our way when it comes to game curriculum. I've had the chance to talk to colleges, help with certain game curriculums, and unfortunately, it seems that the driving factor behind education, and I'm not talking about every college out there, but a large part of them seems not driven by academics or imparting knowledge into students, but it's driven by the growth of the industry, its size, and the capital brought in. So ultimately, people want a part of it because there's money in it. And it's kind of sad to think that our education actually goes into that area when people are seeking monetary rewards and not a way to teach and bettering people. And those borders are being broken today. I know many people who are helping on the college side, people who are helping basically break those boundaries, but there's still a lot of work to do actually on that. Anyways, the journey continues. We start working on PSP. We break the boundaries of what people's perceptions were for handheld games. The reality is that Daxter was built as a platformer regardless of what the platform was, what the hardware was. And people embraced it because we looked at this hardware without borders. We looked at it as something that did not have limitations. And we approached the God of War games exactly the same way, with the exact same mind frame. As a matter of fact, when we first went to Santa Monica to pitch the game, I remember David Jaffe at the time, we came to them to tell them that we wanted to make a God of War game on PSP. David actually said, yeah, it would be great if we could make a 2D side-scroller. And we had to prove otherwise. We had to build a game that was a true God of War game on a handheld platform. And we did break those boundaries in many ways. But the reality of it is that all the work we did to break those boundaries, we actually set new ones. By doing exactly what we wanted to do, by not limiting ourselves to thinking that this was a portable piece of hardware, we suddenly became the PSP developer, which means that we created our own borders, and everybody was looking to us to do handheld, to do only handheld games. And we needed to find a way forward and break the boundaries that we had set for ourselves. And that's when we pitched the Order 1886. We were intent on doing on PS4 what we did for PSP, which was prove what the platform could do. And in many ways, we needed to break the mold we had created ourselves. It ultimately was hard, but we're a few weeks away from launching the Order 1886 worldwide. And the feedback and response has been amazing with the work that we've done. And we have tried to break those boundaries on PS4 and show what next generation meant. But the creation of this game wasn't without its own challenges. When it came to writing for this game, I knew where we wanted to go. I had written the story. I knew how to write a game script. I just didn't know if I knew how to write this game script. So that's when we decided to veer outside the path, the regular path, and rather than getting a game script writer to work with me, we went to Hollywood. We went to an old school, what I would call an old school script writer, Kirk Ellis, who is best known for his amazing job on the John Adams HBO series. He came to this without having written a word for a game. He came into this without having played a single game, actually without having watched a single game. And the reality of it is that breaking that boundary, bringing somebody in, proved to be one of the best partnerships we could ever think of. This partnership, we came to life really when we first shot our first scene. And I'm not going to show you stuff here because we don't have much time. But I hope that when you play the game, you'll be able to appreciate actually the work that went into this, went into actually creating something that was beyond what we were used to actually in games. Strangely enough, actually thinking about this relationship, it's something that has happened actually a few years ago. It's something that we've seen in the Hollywood and Game Summit a few years back. I can't remember when it was, which probably means I'm getting old. But the Hollywood and Game Summit was interesting because I went there with this thought of things coming together, and it was more about Hollywood telling us, hey, here's how, we'll tell you how to do things. So again, our industry at the time did not seem to have much of a voice in that matter, into that mix, but years later, here we are breaking those boundaries as many IPs today actually are going and finding synergies into Hollywood and becoming actually as important as any IP out there. Now to go back to the Order 1886, this was our first big production on PS4. We had to take many risks. Technology was one. Like I told you, story was another. One of the pillars of what we were trying to build was motion capture, and it was mostly unknown to us. That's another boundary we had to break. We had to actually build things that went beyond what we saw in the previous generation. We had to actually do mocap in a completely different way, approach writing, acting in a different way. There's a lot more to be said here. I'm not, again, going to go into the nitty-gritty of it, but it meant, beyond actors, beyond scripts, beyond data, beyond any of that, it meant also fidelity, graphical fidelity. With this generation, we're able to do things like this. This is our game character. This is not a cinematic character. This is something that we've done for the game. This is exactly what goes actually in the playable character. And it goes to show how far we've come actually, even in generation by generation, to create things that are getting closer and closer to reality. And talking about breaking borders, it really is pretty amazing that we are at the beginning of this generation of platforms, and we have so much more to go actually in the next few years that we're going to get closer and closer to something that almost feels real. Actually, we did one other thing, which was create many pieces of technology, one of which was the physics system that we built. We approach physics in a completely different way. Again, not to get into the nitty-gritty of it, a soft bodies physics system, when every physics system out there is more of a rigid body system. We did that not to showcase technology. We did that because we wanted to show people how cool it could be if we could replicate things that we see in the real world, because everything in the real world is soft. And using that, we've been able to show the pieces of gameplay we've been showing for the past year, and hopefully when people play the game, they'll be able to understand that this is, again, about making things feel real. And with all of this in mind, this fidelity in mind, I'm looking forward to seeing where this can go, especially with the steps we're taking in virtual reality with Oculus and Morpheus, because these are the kind of things that will be needed for us to actually finally have VR become something that is part of our industry and not just an ancillary thing that people play with. Reality is what people need in front of their eyes oftentimes, because that disconnect exists if things are not right, and if the better they get, the more people are immersed in it. Anyways, as we look ahead, of course, there are a lot more challenges in front of us, both creatively and business-wise. And there are many aspects that we have to address as developers, as studios, as an industry as a whole. I talked about education. This is probably the most important one, because ultimately what drives our industry are people. And without people, we don't get better. I mean, we are at one point or the other going to go away, and probably have younger, hungrier guys basically doing what they do. But the more we can impart on them, the more we can actually better our education system, the more chances we have actually to not stagnate as an industry and grow. We talked about who screams the loudest earlier. Like I said, I don't want to be the one to do that, but the reality is that there is a lot of people who do that. And unfortunately, and fortunately for our industry, we have to deal with it. Everyone's a critique these days. Bloggers, YouTubers, whatever you want it to be, everybody has a voice. It's good because we need that dialogue, but it's also scary because the smallest voice basically can drive the biggest controversies, and we've seen that happen many times actually in our industry where a little thing is said and it becomes bigger than what it needs to be. And sometimes the scrutiny that we have from everybody can be destructive to development. As creators, we also are in a situation where, talking about breaking boundaries, we are constantly in this cycle of reinventing the wheel. With each generation of platforms, we are forced to rethink our technology in order to deliver a sound gaming experience. Take the camera, for example. It's kind of tantamount to saying to a director, hey, go film something, but first, before you film something, I want you to rebuild a camera or reinvent a camera. And that's what we do with technology. We seem to have to reinvent a lot of things as generations go. Now, don't get me wrong, technology is one of the things we do really well, so it's not like I'm complaining right now, but the reality is that if we're able to homogenize technology, get to a point where we don't have that many differences, we'll be able to rely a lot more on technology that has a longer life cycle, drawing from fewer sources, which actually create an ecosystem a gaming ecosystem that would allow developers to create and not create actually games and not create technology. That's one thing particularly I'm really fond of seeing because that's what I want to do. I want to basically spend more time creating games and not necessarily time creating technology. And as many have experienced, actually, this has been an interesting thing for many years. The finance models in this industry has changed, and it's going to change, and it keeps on changing. And it bodes well not only for us as independent developers, but it bodes well for the industry at large. The last few years at GDC, at D.I.C.E., at E3, there are more and more VC and PE firms that come to the game industry. Now, I know it's been happening for a long time, and there have been hits and misses there. I know that it's happening a lot more on the social and the social gaming side, the casual gaming side, but not necessarily in the core gaming business. But it's going to happen, and the question is whether it'll happen smartly. And without guidance from internally in our industry and from the core business, from the big publishers, this could easily be a train wreck. To give you a good example, of course, is what happened in Hollywood. Legendary brought in Wall Street money to the movie industry and showed that it was viable to bring that money into the industry and make it work. And although at the time, I think there was a lot of people talking about how it was going to fall flat on its face, ultimately they've basically hit it out of the park again and again. And this point about Legendary actually brings me to another point about visual media as a whole, and by that I mean distribution of visual media. And I'm not talking about distribution in our industry going digital, but see, I'm losing my train of thought, I told you. But I want to talk to you guys about distribution actually as far as what distributors can do. Netflix proved a few years ago that they could go from distributors to creators. People laughed at them when they basically first pitched the idea. I mean, probably me included, I think everybody was looking at Netflix going you guys are going to do what? Create content? And guess what? They did, and they did it better than anybody else. They're probably some of the best people to work for right now. I know people who do want to work for them and who are basically striving to work for them because they've been able to do something pretty amazing, go from distributing digital content, distributing physical content as well, to becoming a great creator. And the reality of our industry is that our distributors need to do the same exact thing. This, again, will bode well, not only, again, for us as independent developers, being able to create for distributors directly, but it'll bode well for the industry at large, having distributors being much more involved in the creation of game and just not being out on the outskirts of our industry. So these are just a few of the boundaries we need to break, some that we've broken as a team, some that we've broken as an industry. But the reality of it is that we would love to think of our industry as an industry without borders. And it isn't. It isn't because we need borders. The borders that we have are our goals. They're the things that we have to strive personally as a team, again, as an industry, to try and break. And we need those borders in every single aspect of gaming, technology, creative, business. And looking at our track record as an industry, there's no doubt that all the boundaries we have will break them. And at the same time as we'll break those boundaries, we should be equally ready to embrace the ones that we're going to set for tomorrow, because those are going to be the ones that are going to grow our ecosystem and are going to grow our industry. And lastly, I wanted to bring up something that is very dear to my heart, games as it relates to culture and art. As we break barriers, we kind of seem to stagnate in this kind of field of culture, gaming culture, game as art. And the US, and though the US remains actually the single most influential country in the gaming industry, if you take one single country, it seems that it's really hard to have an open and constructive discussion about, and dialogue about games in culture. Every time a conversation brought up, it's kind of met with skepticism. And the reality of it is that this discussion about games in culture is probably the biggest boundary that we have to cross, because that one is the one that will open the doors to breaking a lot of other boundaries, being part of actually the culture that we live in, being part of the society that we live in. And for that, I'll give you one small example, my last thing I'm going to talk about. Switzerland. Going back to what I talked about, small country, not really a game-centric country. Years ago, back in 2008, the Swiss government came to me, talked to me about stuff that they were doing. And at the time, they were working hand in hand with universities, incubating, nurturing, and promoting game development around the world with their universities within the country. Now, many of the small groups that have evolved over the last 4, 5, 6 years over there are now partnering with really well-established companies like Pixar and other companies like that. But most importantly, the interesting thing was that the Ministry of Culture in Switzerland was having an open dialogue about culture in games and games as art. And they have this foundation called Pro Helvetia that basically promotes that dialogue around the world, not just in Switzerland. Now, funnily enough, in 2007, Roger Ebert said that games are not art and that they will never be art. Well, in some ways, for me at least, this question no longer exists. Games are art, and at least they are in a small country nestled in the middle of the Alps. Thank you very much.